engineering ethics. And this is my information. I'm a software developer. I work in web development currently, and I'm an aspiring developer advocate. And my Twitter handle is right there. And I posted my slides on my Twitter. So if you want them later or if you want to follow along, you can find them there. Now, I'm here to talk about engineering ethics, which feels kind of weird because when I was growing up, I was a bit of a goody two-shoes, and so this feels like a continuation of that. But I hope that you really get something from this talk. And engineering ethics has become something of a popular topic at conferences, and I think there's a few reasons for that. The first is that we kind of instinctively know that we create things that people use and have become increasingly reliant upon. And if they're not good, or if they, cause harm, that's something on us, right? And the other reason I think that engineering ethics talks have become popular is because of the news that feels like it comes out every day. And these newsies really want you to hear these stories. So some of these stories could, have potentially mild impacts, maybe medium impacts, or maybe these stories are about how elections were swung. And one of the recent stories that I've read was about Wells Fargo, and they had a bug in their software, and dozens of homeowners were improperly foreclosed upon. And so, it might have seemed like a small thing. We kind of expect that there are bugs somewhere in our software, but those bugs can have a real impact on the personal lives of people who use our products. Now, engineering ethics is a really big topic. I know they had several other talks that kind of touched on some of these things, but the thing about it is that there's just a number of different ways you could approach the subject. And so I drew a Venn diagram so we can all kind of agree on what this talk is going to be about. Now, this Venn diagram, in the red, we have bad outcomes. And this I'm defining as some kind of loss or hurt, whether that's physical, emotional, financial, some bad event, right? And then the yellow circle represents immoral behavior. And immoral behavior is something that is wrong. This could be accepting a bribe. This could be cutting a corner for some sketchy reason, anything like that. And the blue circle are mistakes. And mistakes don't necessarily have bad motives, but they just kind of happen. So this could be something that maybe you didn't catch in your testing. No malice, but we're not perfect. And so our code isn't 100% perfect, right? And I personally want to talk about the overlaps between immoral behavior and bad outcomes, and between mistakes and bad outcomes. And this is because I worked as a civil engineer before I came to software development. And as a civil engineer, you think a lot about how your work impacts the people that are going to use what you make. And we have systems for minimizing both that blue circle, the mistakes, and the yellow circle, immoral behavior. And I don't know about you, but I'm not a perfect person, and I don't make the right choices every single time, even if I try. So that yellow circle isn't going to disappear. And the blue circle isn't going to either. But civil engineering does this thing called licensure, and the idea is that you're held responsible for these overlaps, right? So if you make a bad choice and a bad outcome results, or if you make a mistake and a bad outcome results, then you're held responsible. And it also tries to shrink the size of the yellow and the blue circles, because licensure helps ensure that people know what professional practice, what moral behavior is expected of them, and can penalize them if they don't comply. And it also restricts practice to individuals who have attained a certain level of education and training, right? And so that would tend to shrink the blue circle. Now, this is just a couple pictures from my previous career. I had, a bunch of different projects, and they ranged from anything like this AC unit that I anchored to the top of this building in San Diego to this is a view from that's a view from a hotel that I helped design near Disneyland, and you can see the glorious Tower of Terror. And there I am with my physical building, and I think there's something about that building being a real thing out in the wild that kind of impresses on you the importance of doing a good job, whereas software can be kind of nebulous because there isn't necessarily a physical thing we can see. Now, it's a really old profession, civil engineering, and it dates back to things like the aqueducts and the pyramids, and we've had a long time to think about it, and certainly a lot longer than software engineers have had to think about their work. And one of the earliest examples of codified behavior for civil engineers is something called the Code of Hammurabi. And you can see the code is inscripted here. And the thing about the Code of Hammurabi is that it follows a form of retribution, but you might better know the phrase an eye for an eye. Okay, and we're going to see how that played out in the code. 228. If a builder builds a house for someone and completes it, he shall give him a fee of 2 shekels in money for each sar of surface. 229. If a builder builds a house for someone and does not construct it properly, and the house which he built falls in and kills its owner, then that builder shall be put to death. I don't know about you, but I was okay with the first one. I'm not so okay with this one. 230, if it kills the son of the owner, the son of that builder shall be put to death. They are not kidding. 231, if it kills a slave of the owner, then he shall pay slave for slave to the owner of the house. 232, if it ruins goods, he shall make compensation for all that has been ruined. And inasmuch as he does not construct it properly, this house which he built and it fell, he shall re-erect the house by his own means. Finally, 233, if a builder builds a house for someone, even though he has not yet completed it, if then the walls seem toppling, the builder must make the walls solid from his own means. So I don't know about you, but some of these sound pretty reasonable, and others don't. But the main point is responsibility. And builders under this code had to take responsibility even on to loss or death. And this is the point in the talk where I take an awkward pause so you guys can think about that. I personally agree with Rory here. Sometimes adding a dramatic pause can help you prove your point. So builders were responsible even on to loss or death. Now, I don't know about you, but I've heard the phrase that tragedy plus time equals comedy. And so I wanted to pick a modern example of an engineering failure so we can further discuss things. And I tried to pick the funniest one, but sorry if this is awkward. But tragedy plus time equals comedy. Now, in the early 1900s, there was a big tank of molasses in Boston, Massachusetts, and they were having a particularly warm January day, and increase in temperature meant that the pressure in the tank went up. And the tank had not been properly designed to to like hold that pressure, right? And the tank burst, and millions of gallons of molasses flooded the neighborhood. And this is the headline from that day. And this tank, it exploded, and the molasses actually knocked over a railway. Like, it was a big wave of molasses. And it says it killed 11, but it was actually thought to be 21 by the end of the thing. Now, the neighborhood was pretty upset, and this went to trial. And it drug on, and it was decided that, the engineers had really dropped the ball here, and something should be done. And so this was the start of licensure in the United States. And so in the broadest scope, we had moved from an eye for an eye, the Code of Hammurabi, to gatekeeping, like Gretchen here saying, you can't sit with us. So instead of demanding that you die if your house falls over, we're saying we don't want everyone to sit at the builder table. And this is how we deal with it now, where this department here, Consumer Affairs, the Board for Professional Engineers, Land Surveyors, and Geologists, limits who gets to build buildings and build tanks with molasses in them. And this licensure, it doesn't make someone a good person, but it is a system of formalized responsibility, and I think that's a pretty good start for ethics, taking responsibility for your own work. Now, I want to tell you guys how I got licensed, and I thought the most fun way to do it would be with a montage. So get ready for that. First, we have to open with some, inspiring music. So like dun 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 dun. And then I graduated from an accredited university. And then I don't know if one-handed push-ups would have helped, but I guess it can't hurt. And then I had to go to grad school where I learned that I didn't really know how to study, but I figured it out. And this contributed to my work requirement to get licensed. And then we had a dance break because grad school was hard and I had finished it. Then I started my job, and I was really proud of all my blueprints. And I had to get off some of that anxiety, and so I went for a run. And next, what I had to do is I had to go door to door to all my coworkers and get them to sign off on me being an engineer officially. And it was actually cubicle to cubicle, I guess. Unfortunately, no one gave me the stink eye like Lucille. And then one last dance break before a 3-day exam that cost more than $1,000 to take, and which only 50% of people pass. And that was it, end scene. I got licensed, and the rest is history. Now, I had a montage. I thought it was pretty cool, but it still doesn't make me a good person, right? And licensure is just a system of formalized responsibility. I promised to talk about code, okay? I'm gonna get to that now. I wanna talk about my process for starting my new career. Oh, no. Sorry about that. All right. So my new career as a software developer. How is that different? What's the process like? Well, the first thing that you should know is that the title software engineer, it doesn't mean anything. When I was graduating my boot camp, which I went to, we were issued these business cards, and they said, Hayley Denbraver, software engineer. Everyone was really psyched about them, and I was kind of looking at the cards and going, oh, I don't know. And that's because civil engineer is a protected title. So this title of software engineer that we have, it doesn't tell the public anything about your credentials or about the standards that you're held to. So it does mean something within the corporate structure or for your career growth, but it's not a guarantee to the public of anything. Another difference was the diversity of background of my coworkers. My current job, we have boot camp grads like myself. We have CS degree students. Who here has a CS degree? Okay, so a lot, but not everybody. We had some self-taught devs, and we had some internally trained developers. And not every workplace is going to be this diverse, but I think most of us work with software engineers that do have maybe a different background, or we at least admire and respect the work of those people. And so that was a big difference. Another difference is how work is evaluated. If you can think to your system for merging code and releasing code, it was quite a bit different. As a civil engineer, I had to draw plans and I had to do calculations, and they had to be stamped and they had to be reviewed by a city or a county, and they had to be available to the public. And that's really not what happens in most cases in software. So you're probably thinking, and it's totally okay, well, okay, Hayley, but so what? Your careers are different, but that's the point, right? You got a different career, a new one. So what? And I kind of agree. This dog may be coding, but the code he's writing, it's not likely to hurt anybody. And even if he doesn't know what he's doing, it's very possible that it's fine, right? And I don't know about you, but I've never written code that could cause a molasses flood. So it isn't the same thing. But we do, I don't know, you should think about the work you do and ask yourself what impacts it might have, even if it's not a flood of molasses. And you should know as well that we do have some rules. It's not a Wild West, dystopian hellscape, none of those things. We have some rules. For instance, like the news story I discussed earlier, the people whose homes were foreclosed upon, they actually got restitution, but that's because banks are regulated, not because software is. And we have rules around health data, around personal data. We have methods for increasing security. None of these are bad things, but I just wonder if it's comprehensive enough for the world that we live in now and the world that we're going to live in 5 years. And one last thing about the difference between civil engineering and software engineering. I appreciate the openness of the software community. These gophers here, they may have different backgrounds, but I'm glad they're all in the industry. We have a lot of positions to fill. They're good jobs, and I personally like to see a variety of people doing a variety of things with software. So I don't really want to see this go away, right? But licensure, it's about exclusion. So I'm not sure how to square this, right? I don't have a crystal ball, even one that has its software broken at the moment. I can't see the future, but my gut instinct is that we will see more licensure, more regulations, more oversight in the future. And I would like us to be able to adopt things and decide on things ourselves rather than having them imposed upon us. So what might that look like? I don't have a complete answer. This is the start. I have limited answers, and we'll iterate and go from there. This isn't the end game. The princess is definitely in another castle. The first thing I'd like to do is promote ethical literacy. You have technical literacy. You're expected to keep up on your tools. I expect you to know what professional ethical behavior is. Second, I want to see review taken more seriously. This is a way that we can reduce that mistake circle from earlier, and that we could grow professionally. Third, I want to see that the title senior should mean something. We may have a diversity of background, but we could have a commonality of mentorship and that kind of professional experience that helps develop people into robust coders that are going to produce good products. Third, I want to improve communication between teams. This can go between product and devs, between sales and devs. The whole team has to be on board in order to make ethical decisions, because it's really hard for a single person to stop the process and ask, like, is this okay? And finally, I want you to pretend you're licensed, really. This may sound a little silly, but it's something I actually had to do in my old job. I had to pretend like I was licensed before I had taken my exam, because it was unfair of me to ask my superiors to put their name on something that I wouldn't be able or willing to put my name on, right? So we're not held to licensure laws, but I think that if we were to adopt the frame of mind that we're licensed and accountable, that could go a long way. So those were the 5 things. Promoting ethical literacy, taking review seriously, senior should mean something, improving communication, and pretending you're licensed. So finally, let's revisit the molasses flood. So early 1900s, 21 people dead, whole town is sticky, really terrible. 100 years before, there was a similar event that happened in London. It was called the London Beer Flood. 8 people died, maybe a 9th from alcohol poisoning. And I think it was something like 1 million liters of beer. And this also went to trial. And throughout the process, it was eventually decided that it was an act of God. And now I ask you, why do you think software engineers haven't been held accountable to the same degree as other technical professions? And I think it's because, to many people, the problems are an act of God. They're not, you can't not have it happen, you can't get away from it, so it's an act of God. And that simply comes from the general public not having the technical literacy required to demand accountability. So here's what I want you to take away. On Monday, when you go into your office, I want you to think about the molasses flood. If you had been a citizen of Boston at the time, even if you hadn't been directly impacted, even if you didn't know anyone who had died, you would be walking around your city and your feet would be squelching from the sticky sidewalk. And you'd get on the train and you wouldn't be able to sit down because the seats were sticky too. They couldn't get away from the reminder of the tragedy. And when you can't forget something, change is mandatory, right? So what I want you to think of while you're walking to work is imagine that your shoes are sticking to the sidewalk. Imagine you have wandered into the molasses swamp in Candyland, and think about how that would feel. When you sit down to your keyboard, imagine it's sticky too. Remember that you work for people, and your responsibility toward them doesn't disappear just because we aren't licensed. And I hope it sticks to you. And thank you so much.